Hello, I'm Clara Lee, and I'm an artist and songwriter. I recently moved away from Berlin, my home for the past 5 years, to live in a small town on the Swedish west coast. Berlin will always have a special place in my heart, and this video might bring some insight to living there. In my case, I studied music, but also worked as a barista and a babysitter. I grew so much during my years in Berlin, and I experienced both the beauty and the cruelty of the city. So therefore I also want to talk about why I left, and what I hope to find by leaving the city. Hello and welcome to a new vlog. So today I want to talk about my move from Berlin to a small town on the Swedish west coast, which is called Båstad, if any one of you know it. Which I doubt, but it's very famous for its big tennis tournaments. And I hope this video might be interesting for anyone who's considering leaving a big city and move someplace smaller. But it might also be interesting for someone who's curious about moving to Berlin, because there's also so many great things about Berlin, and I don't want to make this conversation one-sided. So I think my structure for the video is gonna be that I'm gonna talk about the top 3 things about Berlin, but then also the 3 main reasons to why I left, because there was some solid reasons for why. But yeah, let's get into it. The thing that I miss the most about Berlin is definitely the music and the art scene. Because there was such a huge selection of everything from open mics, where anyone could perform, and also music venues. Both smaller local music venues, but also bigger ones. So you never ran out of options for things to do. And it was also really nice that the fun weren't limited to the weekends, because also on weekdays there were a lot of things going on. Still a lot of concerts, still a lot of people out. If you just wanted to go to a bar or a gig or something, you could go any day, and it wouldn't be empty because there were always people outside. And that's something I miss a bit, because it's nice to be able to do things more spontaneously. So another thing I really miss about Berlin is definitely the open-mindedness and the free mindset. Because it felt like people, especially in the artist community, really validated artists and validated art as something important. And being an artist wasn't just some kind of side hobby that you did while you really prioritized your main job, or really tried to get like a regular job or a regular education. And it was really freeing, and that mindset is something I'm trying to keep with me now, that I'm not surrounded by so many like-minded people. Because I think in the end it comes down to validating yourself and validating the things you create as something important. And I was a bit scared moving back to Sweden, and to a small town especially, that I would get questioned all the time about my creative career. I was a bit scared that people would constantly question me with questions like, oh, why aren't you working more? Why aren't you thinking about retirement? Shouldn't you get like a more stable income? Shouldn't you get another education that's more likely to get you a job, that's more likely to get you some money for retirement? And so forth and so forth. But I don't know, I think it's happened a couple times, but I don't see it as something negative, and I don't see it as criticism, because I think people who ask me that really do it from a place of love and a place of genuine concern. And I'm also not letting it feed my fear, or I'm trying to not let it feed my fear of failure and total destruction of my future. And the third best thing about Berlin is definitely the multicultural environment. Because it was really nice to be surrounded by people from all over the world, and to hear different languages on the streets, and to also experience different food cultures through like the huge selection of restaurants there were. And here in Båstad there is of course some people from other countries, myself kind of included, even though I'm adopted, side note, but but it's not so many, and it also feels quite boring to only be surrounded by the same old Swedish that I always been around. So it was really fun in Berlin, and also the German culture, the German language also was a bit exotic to me, since it was different from the Swedish culture. So the absolute biggest reasons as to why I left the city was because I didn't feel creatively inspired, because I am someone who's really inspired by nature, and it felt like I kind of lost that connection when I lived in Berlin. And the city, it is full of greenery and nice parks and lakes that you can go to, but it didn't feel as real as a real forest or the ocean. And I often was stuck with the thought that nothing felt real. And get me right on this one, because I don't think we own any of nature to ourselves. But I kind of like to build a more personal connection to the things around me. And I don't know, city parks like Kreuzberg or Friedrichshain, where I really love to hang out, I never felt a personal relation to them because of how crowded they were with people and how fast-paced everything were. And that leads into like the second little point of this point, which is that I always felt super overstimulated. I felt overstimulated just by going outside and taking public transport somewhere. And maybe it has to do with the fact that I grew up on a farm in the middle of the forest, because I don't know if everyone reacts like that, but that made it quite hard to do fun things, because fun things often just kind of drained me. But get me right on this one, because I also love doing fun things, and I also had a lot of fun times in Berlin, and I don't think I was this sensitive during my first years, because then I went out all the time to different clubs and I was partying way too much. Well, whatever, but in the later years I was just kind of tired, and I also had the realization that my friends back in Sundsvall, where it's like 60,000 people, went out and did more things, went to more gigs, went to more parties, whatever, than I did, because I was basically just at home on the couch with my boyfriend, with chips and a movie, which is also really nice, but it was so unworth it to be in Berlin to do that when you could just do it somewhere else. And it was also not affordable to go out and do things all the time, especially since most of my income went to the rent, which leads me to the next point. Berlin used to be known to be a cheap city, often through the phrasing poor but sexy, which I don't think really is the case anymore, because it's become quite pricey and the housing situation is a mess. But I wouldn't say, I know it's not like the most expensive European city, but it's definitely not accessible anymore. And I remember during my first year in the city, I moved around constantly, unable to find a permanent place. And the year after, I moved into this one-room student apartment with my boyfriend, who I had newly met. And that place was like more than 1,000 euros a month, even though it was like 35 square meters, and completely made out of concrete. And thereafter, we moved into this two-room apartment in Kreuzberg on a pretty shady third-hand contract. And I think the rent was like almost 1,200 euros. So it was pretty expensive and also pretty run down. And I could never fully relax living there, because I was always kind of scared to be kicked out because of the shady contracts. But it also felt impossible to move, because so many of the people that I knew, who also had like better incomes than I did, were unable to find a place, although they searched for months and months, and they were like willing to move like 45 minutes an hour outside of the city center. So I felt pretty locked, although we were really lucky to have that kind of contract when so many of our friends had way worse housing conditions than we did. And I remember our first plan when we moved back to Sweden was to head to Gothenburg, but since the housing situation is also a mess over there, we weren't really tempted to get back into the same mess again. So instead, we moved here to Båstad. And now we have a 3-room apartment that is like 5 minutes from the ocean for about 650 euros. And this place is also pretty run down, but at least it's a first-hand contract, so we won't get kicked out unless we don't pay rent for a longer time, which we won't. But yeah, it feels way more safe now, and I think for some people moving around a bit might be worth living in Berlin for, but for me it overshadowed way too much of the fun. I love the artist community in Berlin and the free and open mindset, but oftentimes I also experienced it to be quite competitive, and I often found it hard to make new friends and getting to know people because everything was so fast-paced, and it oftentimes felt like people didn't want to get to know you and that they were just looking to network. And not that it's anything wrong with networking, it's just that it's hard to make friends when people are always looking for the next more exciting thing. And maybe it also has to do with the fact that I studied at a music university and that I was also only around creatives. But yeah, it was my experience, and maybe it's mostly in my head. And I also did make some really great friends who I'm very grateful to have in my life, so I shouldn't really complain about it. But it was still the experience I had in Berlin, that it was hard to get to know people for real and make deeper connections and real friends, because people were always moving, people were always planning things, and often in big groups. And I think I personally prefer to hang out one-on-one and have a more personal and deeper conversation. So oftentimes it wasn't for me really. But then it's not like I'm making a lot of new friends here in Båstad. Truth be told, I'm actually quite lonely in the friend department, but it's also pretty self-injured because I haven't really tried putting myself out there and getting to know so many new people. And I think it mostly has to do with the fact that I'm really caught up in my routines and my creative practices, and that I really want to focus on that, and that I don't feel like I have so much time to just do things spontaneously with people and planning in so many hangouts. But I also know it's not healthy to have it like this in the long run, so eventually I need to try to make some more friends. I already know a couple of people, mostly through my boyfriend, but I think it will be helpful with some friends. But for now, I'm also pretty comfortable being alone and just focusing on my own stuff. Finishing off the video, I don't know if we're gonna stay here in Båstad forever. And although I wish we could be certain about the future and set it in stone and just settle down in some place forever, I don't know what I will want in the future. I don't know if I will really crave to be close to more artists and musicians and be part of a music scene. But I'm also trying to really appreciate all the good things about living in Båstad. The nature, for example, and the quiet and calm environments. And thank you so much for watching this. See you in the next one!